Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about how I created this material, which is a world projected tile material which takes a texture of any kind of logo as input and turns it into a mosaic tile pattern. We'll be looking into wrapping options, we'll be looking into setting up a logo size that still works with the tile size. We'll be playing around with the tile size, so the mosaic pattern still works, and we'll be exposing the actual logo input. So if you change out the texture in there, it should still work. So let's get started. First things first, you want to create a material. And in that material, you want to plug in your tile textures. I created a few very simple textures in Substance Designer. You can really use any texture you want for this. I've got a roughness map, a normal map, and a diffuse map. So if I plug those in, and have a look at the material, you can see some very basic looking tiles. As you notice, the tiles are pure white. That is to make it easier to multiply a color against that at a later stage, if that's what you want to do. So first things first, we'll make this material world projected. So to do that, we'll grab the world position and component mask out the RNG, because as you can see in this little gizmo here, the blue direction, the Z direction, is up in Unreal, while the red X and the green Y are the ground plane. So because we're only going to use this tile texture on the R and X plane, that should be good enough. If we plug this straight into the UVs, what will happen though is that we're going to see a repetition of this texture for every single unit in Unreal, which is way too frequent for what we're trying to do. So I'm going to multiply this down considerably. Oh, sorry. By multiplying it down to a value of 0.01, we get a repetition of this texture every 100 Unreal units, which translates to 1 meter in real life, which is a pretty decent number for what we're trying to do. But we might want to change this around at some point. So if you hold S and you click, you get a scalar parameter, which I'll call tile size. And we'll set the default value of that to 0.1, 0.01, sorry. So we can play around with that variable later. After this, you might want to start coloring your tiles. Which, if you multiply a texture against a color, especially a white texture, you will already have a different color. The problem with this, of course, is that you're also changing the color of the dirt, which is not what you want. So I created another texture, which is the color mask. The color mask is a black and white texture that just masks out all the areas where we want the tiles to change color. So it's masked out all the areas where we have dirt. So what we do with this texture is, if we just get rid of this, we add a lerp node and we plug this into the alpha channel. plug this into the A, plug this into the B, and get this into the UVs. The reason why we plug this one into the UVs is because we also want this texture to be projected, just like all the other textures. And what this will do is make sure that we're only coloring the area of the texture that is masked out in the color mask, in this case the tiles. So far what our material looks like is like this, which is the projection is quite is working already. Obviously the color could work if that's what we want to do, if we get a slightly nicer color going on, but no patterns just yet, as you can see. Let me make sure that the tiling actually works. Yep, seems to work fine. All right. So now what we will do is, if we add in an image for the, and we also world project that, and we use that color instead of this, we're gonna run into a few issues straight away. The first issue is we're obviously getting way too many of these logos. We want to be able to scale the logo independent, or the pattern independent of the tiles. And the second problem is that we're going to get these tiles that are only partially covered by a color, while in a proper mosaic pattern we'd want the entire tiles to be colored by a single color. So the first thing we'll do, space this out a little bit, is create a second multiply, and we will multiply this against a smaller number. The reason why I'm using multiplies instead of divides is a multiply is slightly cheaper than a divide because it doesn't have to do a null check. That is not something that makes a massive difference, but for game performance, every little bit can help. So now we can scale the logo, the pattern, independent of the tiles. But the other issue we raised still persists, which is the fact that you can have half-colored tiles now. So to get rid of that issue, we have to do a bit of math. In UV space, a texture. Oh, sorry. If you look at the standard texture coordinates, it goes from black to red so from 0 to 1 on the red channel for a single repetition on the x-axis, and from black to green, so 0 to 1 on the y channel, once for a repetition on the y-axis. And what we're doing here is pretty much that, but instead of doing that in UV space, we're doing it in world space. But that means that we can do very specific math on that to clamp these values, or to make sure that these values are more stepped than what you usually want to use it for. So we know that there's in the default texture there are 8 tiles on both axes. So if we multiply this by a value of 8, we then field these values to make sure that it's going in steps of 1, and then we divide this value again by, we divide it by 8, which is all the same as multiplying it by 0.125. Right now you will have 8 steps, which, as you can see, will fill in tiles completely. But part of the problem here is that we can scale the pattern size independent from the tile size. So here we will actually add a divide to make sure that this is still length, because what we want to do is we want to divide the tile size by the pattern size, because the tiles at this point repeat 5 times more often than the pattern, so we have to keep that number in account. We then multiply this by 8, which is what we were doing here, and then plug this in here, and in this bolt we just divide like this. And I'm fairly certain there was an issue with my logic there somewhere. Let me read through real fast. Where did I go wrong? Okay, so I found the issue. In this divide node, I was plugging in the absolute world position after multiplying it with the pattern size, but instead I should have just plugged in the pattern size. And when I applied that, you can see that is much closer to the look we were going for. As you can see, every single tile is now a solid color, and even when we change the size of either the pattern or of the tiles, that does not change, which is exactly what we wanted. So you might want to offset this pattern a little bit at some point, and we can do that in multiple locations. I would personally suggest doing that before multiplying the pattern down, so you can offset it in world units. So to do that, you'd really just grab this and you add a parameter to it, which is offset. You do have to also component mask this. The reason why we're component masking it is because the only 2 axes we care about are the X and Y axes. So right now, if we want to modify this, we can add 10 units on the X, or 100 units on the X, 200 units on the Y, and you can see the entire pattern offsetting. The next thing we'll want to have a look at is the repetition of the logo or of the pattern, because you might not want that. You might want to have a single pattern and not have anything anywhere else. Something we can do there is, when you go into the pattern texture, you go into the sampler source. You can change the wrapping option. If you set this to shared clamp, what will happen is it will grab the border pixels of this texture and stretch those out infinitely, which is what you're seeing here. The reason you get these green stripes here is because in the original texture, in the borders, it's touching the texture borders, which means that when it stretches out those pixels infinitely, you will get these green stripes when you're authoring your own textures. that is something you'll probably want to prevent from happening, but for this example, it's not really an issue. The problem with this being that your material is now it's more rigid. You have fewer options. So instead of just grabbing this one and setting it to shared clamp, we can actually build in the option in your material instance to change this. So what we'll do to get that is we can build in something called a static switch. A static switch is really just if it's true, you get one branch of logic. If it's false, you get the other branch of logic. The benefit to using switches is that all of this gets done before your game gets built, which means that you're not paying for the other option. So if we set one of these to from texture asset and the other one to clamp, actually I'm going to set one of them to wrap and one of them to clamp, plug in the UVs into both, and then make a static bool parameter, which I will call wrap, and plug that in. Right now, on a material instance, we will get a tick box. If you tick this tick box, wrap will be true, which means that it's going to use this texture. If it's set to false, it will be using this texture. And while the texture is the same, the wrapping mode is different, so you're going to get different results. I'm going to apply that, and I'm just going to create a material instance so we can see all the options that we created. So when I open up the material instance, just apply that as well. These are all the options we have right now. So if you open up the wrap option, you tick it, you can now see the wrapping in action. When you untick it, it disappears again. The pattern size still works as intended. We might want to offset this to somewhere around. Oh, it's not taking my negative values. What is that? If I just expand this, it will take the negative values as well. The color editor doesn't always like negative values. And that is the base logic behind a mosaic pattern, a world projected mosaic pattern. One more thing we can do is create a texture object. So we can actually input a parameter. Sorry, this is a texture parameter. And this is the pattern. If I plug this into both, set this to the green tooth by default. You now have the option to input whatever pattern you like. And that is the end for this tutorial. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you.